Good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's Executive Committee meeting. My name is Aston Mahmood, and I'm the Chairman of this Executive Committee and also member of the Council. Just do some introductions and look to my left.
Good evening, Rose Rouse, Chief Executive.
Hi, good evening. Philip Spur, Director of Place.
Gavin Lawrenson, Interim Director of Resources.
Dorothy Lord, Waterside, an Executive Member for Community Safety.
Councillor Tom.
David Witt, I'm the Executive Member for Resources.
Councillor Zafar Ali, representing Briarfield East and Clover Hill, portfolio holder for Environment and Climate Change.
Councillor Yvonne Tennant.
Adam Pearson from PS Research.
Iftikhar Bukhari, Head of Economic Growth.
Sarah Aston Ward, Head of Policy and Commissioning.
Jane Watson, Democratic Services Manager.
Hal Cultural, Head of Legal and Democratic Services.
Thank you. I have apologies from Councillor Mohammed Iqbal and Mohammed Hanif. One of them is not well, and one of them is on holiday. Feel free to introduce yourselves.
Feeling left over.
Councillor D. Mohammed. Councillor Martin Stone.
Councillor Deering McLeod, thank you.
Chair, happy to accept the apologies.
Thank you. And declarations of interest? No? Public question time? No members of the public here? Is this Dina's last meeting? Can I, from an executive meeting point of view, thank you very much for everything that you've done over the last couple of months. We will miss you. You're a very talented, very knowledgeable person, and thank you for everything that you've done.
You're welcome, and I've really enjoyed the experience, and I really will be watching from afar how Pendle are doing and moving on from strength to strength, so thank you.
Minutes of the previous meeting?
Move them.
All those in favour? So we have a long-term plan for town's investment, and I believe Lauren Newby is online. Yeah. So, over to you, Lauren.
Chair, I was going to do the presentation
So
first.
you do the presentation?
Yeah, no, I was going to go through the report first if you needed to, and then Lauren was going to come in and add the added value to that.
Yeah, so we're happy for the report to be presented first, and then we can...
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
The long-term plan for Nelson, the purpose of the report is to give a progress on the delivery of this scheme and the investment that's been put in. As colleagues may be aware, that the government announced back in October 23 of a funding package of £20 million over a 10-year period. The report to the executive back in March 24 sort of outlined the background to the fund and the reasons as to what the funding is for. It set out a number of detailed requirements. One was the establishment of a governance board of 15 community members, which is currently being chaired by Claire Bennett of Positive Action in the Community. And the members in Section 5 are set out to sort of represent the community and the community drive and working in partnership to help deliver this particular scheme. Now, we have appointed external consultants, and Lauren is behind it and she'll do a presentation in a few minutes, to help set out a vision and long-term plan, an interim plan and then a long-term plan, which has to be submitted by the 1st of August. The guidance from the people who administer this fund at the moment is very vague, but we have put together a process of looking at the main scheme and the main highlights of it, in terms of safety, security, high street heritage and regeneration, as well as transport economy. Now, under section 13 of the report, this sets out the main objectives and what the council is proposing to do in terms of the interventions to meet each one of the selected long-term plans. So there's a table there that sets it out, and my colleague on the call will go through that in more detail. But it sets out the programme, and you can see that it starts off with the S1, S2, which is around the safety and security theme, and then it goes on to H1, H4, H7, and H11. And again, these are the interventions for heritage, and again, details within there. And also, then it goes on to T1 and T4, which is the transport elements of this scheme. On table 1, it sets out the vision or the expenditure in terms of delivering this scheme. Now, it's split over a 10-year period, and there's a 78/22% split between capital and revenue. And these are indicative outlines as to how the spend is going to be undertaken. And in the first 3 years of the implementation plan, this is what the sort of funding profile is going to be looking at this moment in time. Details are still being worked up for and ready for submission by the end of this month, early in August. And again, just to let colleagues know that my colleague will take up the further detailed delivery of what the plan is going to be setting out, but this is just to give you an upgrade and an idea as to what we are going to do to take this plan forward for the next, first of all, the first 3 years, and then the longer term for the next 10 years.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Would you like me to take over now with the presentation?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Okay. Everyone see that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Let me just play around with my screens a second. So my name is Lauren Newby. I'm a director at EcosGen, and I'm the study director for this commission. Just by way of background, so EcosGen are a specialist economic development and regeneration consultancy practice. We've got a strong track record in the preparation of locally specific plans to guide programmes of investment. I've worked extensively in Pendle over the last 5 years. I've been involved in leading the bid for the town deal funding for Nelson, the LUF funding for Colne, developing the UK SPF plan for Pendle, economic resilience and growth strategy, and more recently involvement in socio-economic advice on 3 master plans in Van Aldrick, Earby and Colne. So it's great to be here supporting the council and the newly formed board to co-develop the long-term plan for Nelson. So by way of an agenda, what I want to do is just to give you a brief background to the long-term plan, summarise the approach that we've taken, set out the strategic framework for the plan, including the suggested allocation of funding for the first 3 years. So EcosGen were commissioned by Council to lead a multidisciplinary team, and that includes Reimagine Place, who are engagement specialists, Open, who are placemaking and have provided graphic design support to the Commission, and WSP, who are transport planning experts. And collectively, we've been working really closely since April of this year to develop a compliant long-term plan for Nelson to unlock the £19.5 million allocation of funding. And this funding will be released over a 7-year period with flexibility to spend it over 10 years. So, as my colleagues sort of set out there are 3 intervention themes. So we have safety and security, high streets, heritage and regeneration, and transport and connectivity. And we've been following government guidance on the approach that should be taken to developing the plan and the anticipated coverage. So the guidance has kind of come out drip-fed somewhat in stages over the past 9 months, and that's been helpful certainly in forging ahead and developing the actual plan. But as I'll come on to, there is a gap in terms of an annex that's required to be developed, which hasn't been provided to us as yet. The plan needs to include a 10-year vision, long-term priorities and an initial 3-year investment plan. And a key requirement of the fund is that the plan is led through community engagement, with investment priorities identified in consultation with the community and in partnership with the newly appointed long-term plan board. So by way of approach, the approach has been framed around 4 key stages of work. So as I say, we began the study in April. The first stage involved thoroughly scoping the study through consultation before moving into developing a robust evidence base. And as part of that, round 1 consultation was undertaken with the community and with wider stakeholders, and that all informed a detailed evidence-based report. In terms of just giving you, I won't go into the detail here, but I just wanted to give you a flavour of some of the key indicators which have framed the case for intervention around those 3 identified intervention areas. So you've got a bit of a RAG rating that you can see here down the column of Nelson benchmarked against the national position. So what we can see here under safety and security is that the crime rate per 1,000 people in Nelson is significantly higher than both the local authority and the national averages. Nelson also has a social trust score of minus 20.5, which is significantly lower than the England average of minus 3.1. Under High Streets, heritage and regeneration, the data points to a decline in Nelson's high streets, including low footfall and a high commercial vacancy rate. And some of those broader metrics that you can see here point to below average productivity, a low employment rate, low density rate, job density rates, and a qualification gap. Under transport and connectivity, it's clear that digital capability is a strength of Nelson's. But there is, in thinking about sort of travel to work patterns, there is a lower proportion of people who work from home in comparison to the national average, highlighting the need for those sustainable modes of transport. I mentioned community engagement, and so that's been a really important part of this. Through working with Reimagine Place, comprehensive engagement has taken place to inform the plan. So during round 1, we engaged almost 1,000 people. As part of that, there was over 600 responses to the consultation survey. And alongside that, there were face-to-face interviews conducted, public drop-in sessions, focus groups and phone interviews. And there was also a number of one-to-one key stakeholder interviews. During stage 2, there was further engagement with the community to test responses to the emerging plan. As part of that, we secured over 100 responses to the consultation survey. There's been a focus group held with town councillors and further follow-up stakeholder interviews. So that process has been really, really valuable to informing this co-designed plan. So during stage 3, we've engaged really closely with the town board and also the council's officer working group to prioritise interventions for inclusion, and then to test those through that round 2 engagement I spoke about with the wider community, and that has supported the development of the draft plan. We're still underway with stage 4, so the board actually meet on Friday of this week to go through the draft plan, which has now been carried into a designed document. As I mentioned earlier, unfortunately due to the election period, the supporting guidance that we need to provide the 3-year investment plan has not been forthcoming. But what we have been doing is some work in anticipation of what this will cover. So as part of our work, what we've been doing is working with the community and the board to develop a 10-year vision for the future of the town and clearly identify those long-term priorities for the fund. So we worked really closely with the board to draft and refine the vision that you can see here. So looking ahead to 2034, Nelson is a thriving and vibrant Pennine town, proud of its industrial heritage, striking landscapes and multicultural identity, which inspires community cohesion, enterprise and creativity. Residents are proud of their town and feel they belong, actively influencing positive change. Children and young people aspire to achieve their potential. Visitors enjoy a thriving town centre set in a safe, sustainable and attractive environment, and businesses flourish within a diverse and dynamic economy. Alongside the vision, a set of strategic objectives for the plan have been developed alongside proposed interventions. So this, I believe, is set out in the paper that you have in front of you. But if I could just talk you through these at a very high level. So under safety and security, you can see here that we have two objectives. Firstly, making Nelson Town Centre safer and more secure during the day and the evening. And as part of that, some of the proposed interventions involve assessing and the use of safety and security measures such as CCTV, speed cameras and an increased police presence, specifically looking at street wardens in the town centre. Also using measures to address dangerous driving and vehicle nuisance and greater support for homeless people. And so as part of this process, we have to read across to the interventions that are identified in the menu provided by government, and this sits under S1, Design and Management of the Built and Landscaped Environment to Design Out Crime. We also have an objective around encouraging and supporting residents to look after their local area and to promote greater pride, and as part of that, proposed interventions include a new social contract to encourage people to look after their area. And that's really focusing on antisocial behaviour, dangerous driving, fly tipping and vandalism. And this reads across to engaging with the police force and together considering these interventions that focus on visible crime prevention in defined areas and places. Under High Street's heritage and regeneration, there's been a number of objectives that have been selected. So I'm mindful of the time that I've been allocated here. I'll keep it at quite a high level. But the objectives around reinforcing the town centre's role as a key service centre, creating a vibrant place where people want to spend time and where communities can gather. And as part of that, particularly thinking around interventions associated with breathing new life into vacant and or historic buildings and revitalising urban spaces, and encouraging a cafe culture, so we're thinking how we can encourage people to spend time and dwell within Nelson. Secondly, animating the high street, revitalising urban spaces, achieving synergy in design and breathing new life into vacant and or historic buildings. So really thinking about animating the high street here, particularly thinking about providing enhanced community spaces where people can access services and activities, creating a stronger events programme, really trying to realise the potential of arts and culture as a driver of growth. Thirdly, strengthening community spirit, instilling pride and a strong sense of identity and belonging. So this is really thinking about activities to build pride in place, encouraging local people to be actively involved in Nelson's programme of change. And that reads across particularly to supporting volunteering and social action projects, so really supporting that buy-in and engagement of the local community in this programme of change. And then finally, under this objective is around increasing, diversifying and anchoring the town centre offer with retail, food and beverage, culture and leisure, and encouraging footfall and spend. And particularly here, it was thinking about how we could expand the market offer. That came through quite strongly through consultation, including food and drink, how we support businesses to take advantage of emerging market opportunities. And then under transport and connectivity, we have an objective associated with improving accessibility and supporting health and well-being, particularly through local active travel enhancements. So this is building upon the planned investment and includes links to the canal as an untapped asset supporting health and well-being, potentially playing that role in driving increased visitation. And then finally here we have an objective associated with improving traffic management and road safety within the town centre. So how can we reduce the dominance of the car in select areas and identify some of these issues that have come through really strongly through consultation associated with nuisance driving in particular. So that gives you a very sort of brief overview of the strategic framework and the interventions. And as I say, through the consultation, they've that round 2 sought to test those intervention areas, and it helped to really inform our thinking about the levels of support associated with those. We came back to the board and further refined that menu of objectives and intervention areas, and as part of that discussion we have been looking at allocating funding. So through shortlisting interventions, we've had regard for the strength of the case for intervention, particularly drawing on that robust evidence base, how we maximise the planned existing intervention investment that's taking place, the level of stakeholder support that we've received through consultation, but critically ensuring it is deliverable within 3 years. So what we've been asked to do at this stage is to allocate the first 3 years of funding. So there's quite a bit of flexibility built into this programme, including the ability to roll funding forward, but nevertheless it's helpful to sort of set out our aspirations at this stage of the process. So we've tested and refined funding allocations across each of these investment themes, allocated, as you can see here, by both year and also capital and revenue, to arrive at 4.349 million to be spent by March 2027. So this has been apportioned to safety and security by 20%. Now, safety and security came through really, really strongly in consultation. However, the interventions in the programme have a lot less flexibility than you can get under High Street's heritage and regeneration. So it's important to note here that whilst we've allocated this indicative 20%, many of the outcomes sought can be delivered through the allocation of High Street's heritage and regeneration. So that's going to be really important in allocating funding under that intervention theme, to be very cognizant really of safety and security concerns. So High Street heritage and regeneration, there's an allocated fund at 55%. So as I say, this has got quite a bit of flexibility here, which is welcome and can support aims that may otherwise sit under other themes. And then finally, transport and connectivity, and that is very much recognising that there is a lot of investment already underway, and also, of course, the level of investment required to deliver under transport and connectivity can require significant investment. So it's about trying to get that balanced portfolio of activity across the 3 intervention areas in response to both identified need and recognising the amount of work that's already underway within Nelson. There's also £723,000 that's been identified for capacity and management costs. So that will include a level of staffing, but critically it'll include continued engagement throughout the period. So hopefully that's helpful in just giving you a sort of sense in terms of the allocation that we've reached, the strategic framework and the objectives that sit within that and the planned intervention areas. As part of the next steps, we will be presenting the plan, the designed plan to the board on Friday of this week. We'll be very hopeful awaiting the provision of the technical annex that we need to support completion, with the aim of submitting the final plan to government as required by the 1st of August. I'll pause there and I'll just turn off my screen, and any questions I'm happy to take.
Thank you for that. So that's a very detailed strategic framework document that has been presented. Extensive consultation has taken place with the community, and I think that was one of the main focuses from the initial documents that came out. This has to be community-led, and I think that has been shown within the presentation. And this has to be submitted with on 1st of August, and I think it's been mentioned that it will be presented to the town board on Friday. And I'm very happy to see, and it's good to see that your vision proud to be Nelson. I think that's really positive. It's really good to see that. I'm happy to move the document as well, but open to questions. So.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And thank you, Lauren, for the presentation. It was really helpful. I have been participating in various forums with the consultations. As Lauren mentioned, we had a breakout group from Nelson Town Council. I forgot your colleague's name, Lauren, who attended the meeting, but he was very helpful. Matt, that's the one. He was very, very helpful, very informative, and we're all really hopeful that we can try and turn a corner with Nelson's, not just the High Street, but the town as a whole, with some of the challenges that we're faced with. Of course, we've got the Nelson Town Deal, which is also trying to deliver on the projects that it's been allocated, and hopefully there'll be some dovetailing with the two funds, because some aspects of the fund and the projects here do have some sort of crossover, which is good to see, because there's never enough money to try and resolve some of these issues that have been highlighted, and hopefully there'll be more money in the pot with this new government that's come in, Leader. But that being said, some of the plans which are in here are really exciting. There's the talk of trying to improve some of the shop frontages, some of the alleyways. Councillor Ash, who's not here tonight, obviously made some good points from stuff that's been happening in neighbouring towns as well, which we can probably try and bring into Nelson. And I know that there'll be finer details to come, at a future date. But for now, the feedback from my side and of course the residents that we represent is we are hopeful, we are excited, and we really want to try and deliver on these projects to try and aim at tackling some of these major problems that the town has had for decades now. Of course, the town centre is one of the focal points of these projects. Some of the things I've been speaking about in my role as portfolio holder with the likes of David Walker is an environmental warden, for example, for the town. I know there's mention of more policing in the town centre. There's one thing that I wanted to point out was the topic of public toilets, which has come through to P&R in previous years as well, in terms of public toilet availability in Nelson. And maybe that's something, Lauren, that you could pick up at a later stage when there's further detailed discussion. So that was one point there. And the other point I wanted to just seek clarification on was under transport and connectivity. Are these initiatives around the town centre only, or are they town-wide?
So we've got, in terms of an intervention area, the intervention area for the long-term plan covers the built-up area of Nelson, so it's beyond the actual defined town centre. We're at a point where one of the things we've done in readiness for getting this technical annex is we have been working really closely with the board and the officer group to sort of develop ideas around the potential things that could come forward for funding. So we have got sort of a bit of an understanding around where some of the gaps may exist under that theme, and some of the things that could come forward as part of that. But there'll be no decision made at this point in the process. We don't actually need to do that decision making ahead of putting the plan in. So I think it's really important to have a very robust process that underpins project selection and the allocation of funding. So we're not quite at that stage, really, of actually selecting those projects that would go forward. We've just got a good sense of some of the things that could be in the mix, really.
Through you, Leader. Thank you for that, Lauren. And I agree with that approach as well. And naturally, you're the experts on this, so hopefully I'm more than happy to tap into some of the more specifics of some of the areas or the problematic areas when it comes to dealing with that particular intervention. The other thing I really liked the sound of was the encouraging of a cafe culture. I know Rose has mentioned some points on the board meetings in terms of trying to promote and trying to drag a big name coming into the town centre to try and help people spend more time and of course money in the town centre. So hopefully that'll turn to fruition in the near future. and of course animating the high street. You know, I was in Antalya not too long ago, and you know, some of the lighting areas, for example, in the Land of Legends, you know, we could make Nelson the land of legends given the money that we've got in some aspects. And there's talk of trying to improve some of the alleyways, for example, so maybe we could you know, have some sort of lighting type features. I know there's a water feature that's being discussed in some parts, and these are all really exciting projects which hopefully can be delivered upon. And really, once again, thank you, Lauren, to you and the team for all the consultations you carried out as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation for the start. Great ideas all round. There is one criticism I would like to make, which is around the interventions proposed around CCTV and increased police presence. I mean, I feel that these kind of things should be looking more longer term, you know, changing the base of this sort of thing. And to me, an increased police presence, you know, under this time scale, which would eventually go away, or an increase in CCTV, which obviously has an upkeep cost into the future, they don't necessarily get to the heart of those issues. They just provide a plaster over them, and they don't change hearts and minds and behaviour to the extent that I'd want something like this to do. So, I mean, S1, design out crime. I don't think you design out crime I'll take the example of dangerous driving. I don't think you design that out by increasing CCTV. I think you do that by interventions in the streetscape. So, you know, continuous crossing pavements, which provide a physical bump for drivers to go over, so you physically can't drive fast and cause a nuisance. And I wonder if that could just be revisited, because I know Nelson already has an extensive CCTV network, and I don't think increasing the surveillance state, as some people call it, actually does change the hearts and minds of people's behaviour. And I think it's, you know, moved towards, you know, an authoritarian sort of regime, if that's not too negative a spin.
Thank you, that's a good point there. Lauren, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I could, just briefly, and I think you've hit the nail on the head really, and this is one of the reasons why the suggested allocation for safety and security is lower than what you might expect given the problems that have been provided to us, and it's because of the flexibility that's provided in the guidance associated with that. So, you know, you've obviously got quite a skew towards capital spend for a start, and some of the things that you've just spoken about there is actually how do you tackle issues through prevention and working with the community to try and sort of shift that behaviour, which is tricky. So that certainly under this one where we've got that a new social contract, that does speak to some of that. But some of the funding associated with transport and connectivity in high streets that are more around the public realm and the streetscape is where we can bring interventions in to support that activity. As I say, at this stage, we don't have to specify projects, but it's really good to get that feedback around what works or what might not work. And certainly some of the conversations we've had around CCTV align with what you've just spoken around there. There does seem to be quite a high degree of support for street wardens. That seems to be something that seems to be very welcome by people. And I think, you know, working really closely with the police to sort of do that more enhanced security audit and looking at what the interventions are that could be appropriate is probably the way to go here. But equally, sort of weighting the funding towards other interventions that give us more flexibility to make those changes to the streetscape and the built form are really important.
Thank you. Councillor Wall.
Thank you, Chair. The town centre wardens is a brilliant idea, and we had one in Colne some years ago, and he just took such pride in the town and looked after all things like fly posting. You know, you could see him rip them down, and graffiti, dog fouling, litter, anything that wasn't acceptable like that, he looked after and he got rid of it. And he was a great asset to the town, he really was. Another thing that I'm keen to, for somebody to implement anyway, is people with disabilities. And, you know, to make sure that they can get around. In Colne we have, I don't know whether you've been to Colne, but in Colne we have independent shops, and a lot of them have very heavy doors. And no handles to grab hold of. Some have steps. I know one business owner has to come out to serve one of his customers who's in a wheelchair, and I think that's dreadful, and I wouldn't like to see that kind of thing. So I think, anybody with a disability, and if we can put some emphasis on that in this town, or any town really, but while we're talking about this town, so people can move about freely and not be hampered by other things that need not be there, or perhaps something else in its place. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, thank you.
Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely welcome that. I think that that thread around inclusion and accessibility is absolutely key. So yeah, certainly I think when we're sort of looking at how you bring forward projects, there's certain criteria that you'd be looking to sort of really demonstrate, how does it contribute to inclusive growth and sustainable growth and so forth. So yeah, I think that's great, and good to hear about the street warden scheme in Colne as well historically. That's really positive.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, the other one.
Just a quick question. Is there any accountability to the disabled accessibility activists on the board? Is there any membership from a disabled group on there? And just a question, are you going to be feeding back to like the I can't remember what the name of it, but the blind, for example? Is there a bit of a working relationship there? Are you planning to build one? And what's going to happen?
I believe there are traders on the board, but yeah. Can't you come in again, Lauren?
And actually, I think perhaps can Rose or Philip sort of think about the representative question. Is there some? I know we've got really good spread, haven't we, in terms of representatives on the board? Is there anyone explicit that would speak to that agenda?
Thanks, Lauren. Through you, Chair. We have quite good voluntary sector representation on the board, including the CVS, who have linkages to a number of different organisations. So they operate as a hub and spoke effectively to a lot of different organisations. But it's a good point, and it's one that we should take away and have a look at and just test that to make sure that we're getting that kind of input and checking on what we're doing.
Yeah, and just to add that briefly through yourself, Chair. The board membership is obviously set out within the report. The membership was actually quite prescriptive in terms of government guidance. So the government made it clear to us we needed a board conrep, we needed a health representative, the MP, college and so on and so forth. So quite prescriptive representation. But as Rose said, we thought that can build a wider network out within Nelson and beyond.
Thank you. Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. I think a lot of what's been said here is something that I believe public services ought to be doing as of right across the board. And obviously I come at this from a wider perspective. And I note that the new government has dropped levelling up from the title of the government department, and hopefully that's indicative that we'll actually get some genuine investment in public services across the piece, rather than picking out very specific areas or communities that get some special treatment. And I don't begrudge Nelson getting additional funding, but I think there ought to be a fair deal for every part of Pendle and every part of the country, rather than it being concentrated in particular hands. So a lot of what we've heard, it is motherhood and apple pie. You wouldn't argue against it. but I do worry about cohesion, and I'm concerned that this concentration of resources, in our case, in one particular part of Pendle, breeds disaffection and division across Pendle. And I've said this before, and I hope I don't have to repeat it in the future, but we need to be very careful that this does not breed resentment in communities that aren't seeing those public services which we should all expect as a bare minimum of a decent civilised society. I also think that the scheme as a whole is misconstrued. You know, the previous government have come in with a series of defined issues that they're saying need to be addressed. But if I think about Nelson and other parts of Pendle, I see poor housing as being a priority. I see poverty as being an issue, and I see life expectancy and health outcomes as being much more relevant than some of the issues that are being focused on within this programme. So I think the whole thing is misconstrued. How long this and similar initiatives survive with the new government, we will wait to see. Just one further point, and Zafar, Councillor Ali, mentioned public toilets, and I'm pleased to come from a community, Barnoldswick, that proudly continues to provide public toilets, has done since they were handed over to town and parish councils, and there are 3 high quality public conveniences in Barnoldswick that people can come and use. And I'm not suggesting Zafar that people would trot over from Nelson to come and use our public toilets, but clearly there are mechanisms already in place within Pendle for public conveniences to be operated. They do operate in other parts of Pendle, and I would encourage all involved to, you know, if that's an issue, it can be gripped, and that provision can be put in place without having to be starred up by central government for additional funding. So, you know, we ought to be able to do a lot of this work, and we ought to we must get the resources from central government that allows us to do this work across the piece, across the board, and not just in specific areas. And I think that's crucial for the long-term cohesion of our communities here in Pendle.
Thank you. Yeah, I probably agree with you on the poverty, housing, and the health aspect. I mean, these are very long-term kind of issues that we've been trying to tackle. I think previously it was, with the housing market renewal, I think that was an element. Child mortality rates were quite high, so part of the health programme. I think we tried to do that previously, but the previous government obviously had different priorities, and things. And the funding and everything else just went in a different direction. So things didn't proceed, and so their approaches were different. But hopefully the new government will take this seriously. I think we have a Deputy Prime Minister who has a very good understanding of poverty, housing and health, with an own personal background. And being the communities and housing Secretary of State, I think there is potential for us to work with her, to lobby for these kind of strategic projects. In relation to community cohesion, I think that has been highlighted by Lauren, and I think one of the strands is focuses quite strongly on community cohesion, and that's the whole purpose of being proud to be Nelson, and I think that will hopefully bring together communities and improve the community inclusion. Councillor Storm.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Warren as well for the presentation. And also the excellent work that some of the people around the table have put into developing this plan as well. I'm sure that all residents of Nelson, and indeed the nearby villages like Barrow Ford, recognise that Nelson is a palpably deprived town and it desperately needs investment, and notwithstanding the limitations, the framework within which we're working, I think we should all be welcoming the proposals here. I had a couple of questions for Lauren. In terms of safety and security, you mentioned a social contract as a way forward. What I don't understand about that is how surely those least likely to sign being recognise a social contract are most likely to be the persistent offenders in terms of antisocial behaviour and that kind of thing. And the second query I had was in relation to transport and connectivity. And you talk about reducing the dominance of the car. Nelson is largely already pedestrianised or semi-pedestrianised in the town centre. And surely it's great, we want to regenerate the high street and we want to regenerate the heritage and get people to come into Nelson from outside of Nelson. Surely we should be also accommodating car transport and parking as well. So those are my two questions for you.
Lauren?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think under the social contract, it's very much thinking about how we can support that education piece, really. It's about how do you work with the community to sort of a targeted approach. The street wardens concept is part of that as well, championing that civic mindset and how we promote more pride in place. So I think the actual, the projects that would fall out of that will need more development in the next stage to think about what that essentially would mean in practice. But I think that there seems to be quite a high level of support generally for the concept and the need for it. So I think part of this process will be looking at some of the ideas that come forward in the next stage to support that. As I say, street warden seems to be quite a developed idea that can support with that, but we need to go beyond that, in targeting some of that antisocial behaviour, dangerous driving and so forth. Looking at good practice from elsewhere always forms a good way forward to think about what does this actually mean in practice. So I think looking ahead, we can see that at this stage of the process it's more about how you allocate funding to a particular intervention area, but then thinking ahead we'd have to sort of develop the projects into more detail that sit within that one. And then in terms of transport, the car parking in particular did come through quite strongly in consultation. So that is something that we need to be mindful of. But we're also, as part of this process, mindful of existing activity that's taking place. So thinking about parking strategies, for example, car parking strategies that might be taking place. So we need to work with those. But I think the concept of really trying to hone in on select areas, and particularly thinking about those areas that have been identified as having those boy racer concerns, seem to get quite a lot of traction with the community in terms of feedback, and that read across to that intervention area around improving the road network. So it is a balanced approach, I think, between promoting active travel under T1, but then also looking at the road infrastructure to support effective movement of cars as well under T4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ahmed?
Yeah, once again, thank you for the presentation. It's been really helpful and useful. I've made some notes while various speakers talked about the presentation. Just first of all, just touching upon the issue just mentioned in terms of boy races. If the area that we're looking at is going to be around the town centre, and specifically focusing on boy races around that area. I think all we'll be doing is moving the so-called boy races from the town centre to other parts of the town and other parts of the borough. I think it's more a cultural issue and an education thing rather than just trying to bring them forth. I think both of these go hand in hand rather than just trying to move them away from the town centre specifically. I just want to touch on the representatives on the board itself. I know it is specified as to what the membership should be. As with the Nelson Town Board, I think it has moved slightly in a better direction in terms of community representation, but I think looking on the list we have, there doesn't seem to be anyone, apart from maybe a businessman from the town centre, a real person from, a Joe Blogg sort of person from the street. I'm not sure whether that's allowed under the criteria which the government gave in terms of membership of the board. So that's one of the questions I have. Just touching upon a really important issue which has been discussed about community cohesion. I think we all have a responsibility in terms of community cohesion. I think what we say and do, our actions and our words, do have consequences. And I think we need to be really careful the message we're sending out as elected members as well, in terms of the focus on the investment, because we are highlighting an issue which I don't think is an issue, because in terms of funding, it's, historically, if you look at all the funding that's always come into, say the borough, it has been in the deprived area. That's historically happened, not just with this government, but successive governments, because that's how funding has always been allocated. So I think we have got a duty to be careful as to the message we want to portray. Just looking on page 3 of the report which we have, some of the issues which have been raised. In terms of the evidence base for making the town centre safer, I just want to look at what the evidence base was, and in terms of how we've come to the conclusion that Nelson Town Centre isn't safe. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but I think what I'd like, my question is around what evidence has been relied on to come to that view that Nelson perhaps, or it's a suggesting, that's a suggestion I think from reading it, that it's not a safe place. I do agree with a new culture, and I think we need to have a real mindset in terms of keeping our area cleaner and tidy in terms of fly tipping and vandalism, and there needs to be a real shift in terms of a mindset and pride in our area, and I think that's a real big challenge. And no matter how much money we spend, and money isn't unlimited, there is, having said that, there is large investment that is coming into Nelson from this particular funding and from the Nelson Town deal, but funding alone isn't going to solve some of the problems, because I think, speaking to some people, I think they think because we've got this money, all the problems in Nelson are going to be solved, and I don't think necessarily the case. It's not just money by itself. I'm asking a lot of questions, but another point is, you mentioned about offering food and drink outside, not encouraging outside markets. So my question on that specifically is, what research has been done, what impact that potentially could have on existing businesses in the centre? So if we are going to encourage outside markets for food and drink, what impact is that going to have on other businesses who already exist or will be coming into Nelson Town Centre long term? And I think Zafar's made the point in terms of the link between this bit of funding and also the town board, and how that is going to be interlinked with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Trying to decide which one to start with. Right, I'll start with safety and security question. You asked about the evidence base. So we've got quite a comprehensive evidence base that will be appended to the plan, and that goes through all of the statistics that were both made available to us. The government actually provided a data pack, which was really helpful, but then we kind of honed in from our own knowledge into some of that supporting insight. So we were able to sort of really draw out some of that strength of the case for intervention associated with the crime rate that I talked about earlier, and thinking about types of crime in particular. So, yeah, things like criminal damage, antisocial behaviour, drugs, robbery, theft, certain types of crime that stood out quite strongly in the area, and we were able to really sort of drill down to what we call the lower super output areas, so a really kind of granular geography within Nelson to see where some of those hotspots exist within the actual intervention area. And particularly thinking what we could see there in the town centre around Manchester Road, Leeds Road, Broadway, and then to the east areas around Belgrave Street, Earl Street, Baker House Road as an example, and then to the west as well around Lomershire, Meadowbank Road, Pendle Street. So we've got quite a lot of kind of granular detail, and then associated with that we've got the consultation evidence. So that came out really strongly around people not feeling safe at night, for example. Some issues around trust in the police came out quite strongly as well, particularly amongst young people. Examples of antisocial behaviour, particularly drug use, boy racing, that came out repeatedly, and that relates to residential areas as well as the town centre. But also reflections around, young people feeling they had nothing to do, or actually places where they could gather safely. And that can be a contributing factor to antisocial behaviour. Also perceptions around safety in the town centre were more negative amongst women. So we've got the supporting analysis that I guess synthesises both the data evidence but also the consultation findings, which have helped to sort of frame our thinking around some of those. Some of the selections that we've made around the intervention areas, but as I say, when it comes to the project level detail, we're not at that point of selecting projects. We've just got a good sense of some of the things that we could do to spend that money, because we want to be ready to act, ready to draw down the funding as soon as we can to start certainly making some quick wins and visible change in the shorter term, but recognising this is a longer term programme of change, and that's really welcome because, as you know, often the funding that we get given is really short-term in nature and you have to spend it so quickly. So having that flexibility and that ability to drive long-term change is really welcome. And then the other question I probably would just hone in on is your one around food and drink as an opportunity. Certainly a lot of the consultation evidence spoke about people leaving to go to Burnley and beyond really to access the restaurants that are on offer. So I think currently there's a sort of strength of feeling that's kind of coming through in the footfall evidence as well, that you're losing spend from the town because of the offer. So part of the process here is thinking, how do we diversify the offer to actually retain spend? So it's not necessarily about trying to displace what's there already, it's about how do we build on and extend, so we're attracting a wider audience into the town and supporting visitation on that front. So certainly part of this programme there is scope to offer wraparound business support for entrepreneurs, so that's something that would really welcome. How do we actually support local businesses or potential entrepreneurs to access these emerging market opportunities?
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back in on Councillor Martin mentioned the reducing car dominance, and just to say, I mean, I'm supportive of that sentiment. Looking at our European neighbours, it's very clear that if you have a car dominant environment, you can't meet a lot of the objectives you're looking for in this. Your cafe culture is just not compatible with a busy main road. You need people to be able to feel safe in that environment, not have the overwhelming noise of traffic, be able to have a conversation and not having to speak up over the sound of cars going past you. And I think that's so important to improve people's perception of an environment, to reduce the car dominance in that area. I think Nelson is well serviced by public transport. I think what it lacks is that safe environment to go from those public transport links to where the businesses are. and you're achieving that through the other schemes. And part of that is crossing the road. If you've got a busy main road and you've got nuisance driving, it can be very, put offish to want to cross those streets and explore Nelson in the way that people should be able to in a safe way. I think in terms of parking, I really don't think more parking needs to be created. If you start creating more parking in a town centre, you're using up that valuable real estate. The area in the town centre is the most valuable part of the town. If you knock that down for a service parking, you're just wasting that space for a potential other uses. And I think that would just be such a bad long-term investment, and that just would not see a return.
Thank you. Can I just thank IFD, Lauren and the whole team that's working on this project. For a second.
Second that, Chair. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So the next item is the strategic leisure review, and so do you want to?
Yeah, if I can, Chair, I've just got a very, very brief paper, so just a couple of seconds, maybe as an introduction to Adam, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right, wonderful. So, Chair, Exec has been given a very, very brief paper, to say really it's to provide the context for the presentation from Adam on the results of the latest consultation on the leisure provision within Pendle. The paper also reminds Exec of various previous work that's been undertaken by consultants looking at the leisure centres and some of the challenges that are faced within the borough, and the report does seek a steer from Executive in terms of the way forward for leisure provision within the area. Very, very briefly, Chair. So the report outlines the recent reviews undertaken by consultants Max Associates, KKP, and most recently by Strategic Leisure. It references the Strategic Leisure report that was taken to ONS and Exec in late 2023. It highlights some of the challenges faced by the leisure service, the operational deficit and the need for significant investment going forward. And it also highlights the little available external funding to support those improvements. The report sets out the ONS recommendations and the recommendations from Executive back in December 2023. And there were two I particularly highlight, Chair. The first is that we do an exercise to look at external funding sources, and that's appended to the report. And the second, and most important in the context of this evening, is that we undertook some further external consultation. That consultation was undertaken between late February and late March, and Chair Adam's here to present the results of that exercise this evening.
Thank you very much. Over to Adam Pearson.
Thank you very much. So yeah, that has set the context, so I'll spend the next 10 or 15 minutes just running through the results of the survey. Just to set the scene as well in terms of what it is and what it isn't. This was all about giving people an opportunity on that early engagement on some of the ideas that have come through from the review. Also communicating some of those. It's also important to know what it isn't as well. It's not that kind of census of all residents, but it's not operational data, so it just needs to be interpreted in that context. So we had over 2,300 responses over about a 4-week period, so it's about 4 times what we usually get in a typical Pendle survey. So I think that shows kind of the strength of interest in this topic area, but also how we reach quite a lot of people in that short period of time. Because it was an open access survey, you can't necessarily ensure it's completely representative of the borough. We've probably got slightly more responses from the BB18 area, less from the BB9 area, so it's just got to be presented. Also, because we asked around what the facilities they use, we quite like to get swimmers responding as well. So again, just bearing that context. Also got low engagement from some groups, particularly Asian British visitors. So again, if you further down the line, if you do anything else, it's how we do it. So first question was just to establish their use of Pendle Leisure Centres, to set the scene. So on the left is Pendle Leisure Centre, Pendle Lakeland, Swift Sports Centre. Green is if you used it in the last 3 months. Orange longer than 3 months ago, but in the last year. Blue over a year ago, and grey never used. Shows that overall we've got Sports Centre and Pendle Leisure Centre, about half using it in the last 3 months, but the ones on the right hand side show in the last 3 months, and basically it's very much linked to postcodes. So for Pendle Leisure Centre, 4 in 5 of those from BB8 are using it in the last 3 months. West Craven up at 84% of those BB18. So it's saying to me that people very much use their local leisure centre. The other thing as well, by cutting that data up a little bit more, is looking at it at an overall picture. This is showing that just over half, 52%, only use one leisure centre in the last 3 months, and about a third use more than one centre. So about half are very much just use that one leisure centre. Looking at facilities they use, as I said, 9 in 10 use swimming facilities, and then about just short of 2/3 use fitness facilities. So again, as we get to some of the other questions later on, it's just setting that context and setting that scene. On the right hand side, I imagine this as well will line up to the operational data, so you'd be interested to see what that looks like. But you can see about 3 in 10 if you had swim only and fitness only, you're only using one type of facility. We then asked a couple of ranking questions around how important different factors are. So first of all, we looked at the types of facilities they want. Very much lines up with the previous slide in terms of most important at the top, least important at the bottom. So at the top are your swimming, so it's your swimming pool for public swimming, swimming pool for organised lessons. You can see gym and fitness is below that, but on the right hand side, what it's saying is when we look at just those that use fitness facilities, actually it becomes a lot more important. The story there is a fairly obvious one, that depending on the facility they use is how important they see it. This one to me is more interesting. It's the wider factors that they consider important when they're using a facility. Again, same with most important at the top, least important at the bottom. And it's essentially saying location is the #1 thing to people when they're choosing their leisure facility. They want it to be close to home. Below that, it's around cost, affordability, value for money, and then beyond that, is like the quality and condition of the facility. So they're the 3 things. It's got to be close to them, followed by good value and decent quality and condition. Having a wide range of facilities in one centre is lower down. You can see that as the 4th, the 6th. Again, so when we look at some of the ideas put forward in reviews, it's useful context. The last question we asked to get a sense of what they want in facilities is these different things, how important they are. So these percentages are the percentages that said they're very all quite important. You can see that virtually all recognise that facilities should be accessible to all, and virtually all feel like they should have on-site parking. It's interesting that the on-site parking being important is up at 92%, being close to public transport links is at 60%, so it's showing there's that kind of emphasis on using cars to get there. Being environmentally friendly facilities, 3 in 5 think that's important. It rises a little bit if they're older. Then we come to, there were 5 ideas we pulled out from the previous reviews that we put forward to people. So kind of sit into 3 broad areas. There's a couple that are around keeping 3 centres in some shape or form. There's a couple that are around moving to a 2-centre model, and there's one which is just a 1-centre model. So I'll talk through each of those, but with the data. So green, we asked them at initial level, having seen those, to what extent they think they're a good idea. Green is very or quite good idea. Yellow, not a very good idea, not a good idea. So if you want to start at the bottom, that is do nothing but expect that the facilities will deteriorate in 3 months. That's basically it. Everyone has recognised that isn't a good idea, that you can't just do nothing and something's got to change. On the almost the opposite side of it, it's that kind of radical one of shutting them all and moving to one super centre almost. That again is an unpalatable option to people in that sense. It becomes a bit more mixed in the 3 above. So in third, you've got about 3 in 10 think that refurbishing 3 existing centres but going down to like reduced facilities in each, so maybe closing the fitness or swimming or whatever. Just above that is moving to 2 leisure centres, but with 1 existing centre and 1 new purpose-built one. The one that's at the top, but it's still a split view really, with 45% think it's a good idea, 50% not a good idea, is moving to 2 leisure centres where you're refurbishing 2 and closing 1. what I'll do now is kind of go through those and go into a little bit of the feedback on each, because once we asked that, we asked you know, their thoughts and ideas on that. So the one that's almost in third place, if you like, on refurbishing 3 but closing certain areas, you can see that the main thing was because we had a lot of swimmers responding, it tended to be more that they thought the gym, if they were going to close facilities, close the gyms in it. Some people also suggested whether you could just close them at certain times, so you might, you know, close it in one, be closed in the morning and be open somewhere else, and vice versa. Others said that you'd have to review the, you know, base it on the usage of each facility. What you could see as well, like they were really keen that all 3 swimming pools should be open. That was a strong feeling come through there. And a lot of the reasons around that was feeling that everyone should have access to a local swimming pool, the impact on young people and children, and that covers that one. So these are the two centre models that were almost second and first in the order. So on the left hand side is almost the second place one. So this was refurbishing 1 and going to 1 new centre. So of the feedback we had, most would suggest any new facility would be somewhere around between Colne and Nelson in those main terms. But there was a general concern around like what the cost implication would be of building a new centre in some shape or form. Common across both is they were more likely to mention retaining West Craven, but again I think that's the context of more responses from BB18, so I would probably expect that. Also, generally there was concern that, you know, they might agree with the principle of the idea, but there was concern about which centre would close and it would be around which centre they're using, essentially. 3 and 10 thought none of the ideas were good, so quite a significant number, and of those, the majority, or a big chunk of them, would say that their rationale was that we should keep 3 and invest in them. So these were the kinds of things that they were talking about. Their ideas very much almost around increasing income, so whether that's through memberships or usage. So there's quite a lot of comments around the membership models and pricing and things like that. So, for example, this idea of there being 1 Activo membership, there's quite a lot of feedback that it didn't necessarily work for them, because we've seen the data earlier on in that they generally just use 1 centre or 1 type of facility. They didn't necessarily feel they were getting value out of using all of those. So there was suggestions around off-peak memberships, swim-only memberships, centre-only memberships, a lot of feedback around that. There was also some suggestions around reviewing pricing and whether reducing costs would actually increase usage and then you know, create more revenue. A variety of suggestions around improving the offer. So that tended to be around like opening times, so there's quite specific ones around opening times at the weekend, but if you're working that you couldn't necessarily get to those. And I think there's just a general sense of could it be a bit more commercial and advertise itself more and generate more money that way. So this sums up all the other ideas. So we coded all like 2,300 comments, all coded, but you can see the main bits there were keeping all 3, investing all 3, this strong sense around keeping West Craven open, and then the increase in memberships. But yeah, wide variety of there. We did a final question to understand what impacts they thought any changes would have on them or the people. The big ones to consider around, you know, general impact on physical and mental health if they weren't able to use the facility in the same way. But then, sat under that, I think the big themes were around young people and children and access to swimming for lessons and schools and things like that. And also the potential impact of travel and being able to get to different centres if a centre local for them. So my kind of recap reflections in 1 page from 2,300 responses is that clearly people in Pendle feel really strongly about this, for it to get 2,300 responses, particularly swimmers and those using West Craven Sports Centre. If you look at those 5 ideas just on face value, if there was one option that was people were a bit more split on, it's around refurbishing 2 centres and closing 1. But the sentiment in all comments is effectively as long as it's not the centre I use, so it's not a straightforward one. I think The ranking and importance data tell us quite a lot in terms of what people value, like particularly that location side and the value for money, but also the fact that that using the wide range of facilities in one centre is less important to them as something else. And then I think there's a general one for me of what, to what extent that lines up with the data Pendle Leisure Trust actually have on memberships, and does that kind of cross facility and cross centre usage stack up. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the public survey.
Thank you, Adam, for that presentation. That's some information to absorb. Handshaking.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was quite impressed with the response to that survey. I mean, it's more of a fact-finding survey than a consultation. And the number of responses, 2,300. I forget how many responses there were in terms of the Nelson Town Deal funding, the longer term plan for Nelson responses. But I mean, that was quite significant. And I also noted that almost half of those responses were from West Craven, and I'm grateful to residents and people in West Craven who responded to the survey. I also noted that the vast majority of users use the swimming pools. The location for the people who responded is the number one issue. And the final thing that I wrote down from the Adam's presentation, that for many, keeping swimming pools should be the focus. And I would wholeheartedly endorse that final sentence there, Mr. Chairman. As a shared administration, we've set out to say that we want to keep 3 sports centres going, and we made a start on that earlier this year by putting some £2 million of funding in place to get on with essential work. And I've got a question on that which I need to come back to. I'll just write it down there. And invest in energy saving measures as well. So we've made a start. Now, the report that we've got quite rightly points out that the original suggestion of building a new centre at Seed Hill in Nelson, together with the refurbishment of West Craven, would cost £50 million. I think the whole council accepted that wasn't a runner, that there weren't £50 million going, and a further exercise was carried out to see, well, you know, what can we do cheaper, and it came up with a figure of between 25 and 30 million. Now, clearly, we haven't got 25 or 30 million either, so that's not a runner. So, Chairman, you know, how do you eat an elephant? You do it in small pieces. And I think the investment that we are able to put in, the investment that we've got underway at the moment, is a start on actually addressing, first of all, the backlog of work which, for one reason or another, had been held up and delayed, not carried out. Some of it essential, some of it from a health and safety point of view highly desirable, and we've also got to start on that energy conservation work. So, Chairman, we do need to save money, but I think it's quite clearly part of the fun swimming against the current for us to propose that we start closing any facilities. And it's quite clear from the response to Adam's survey that there will be huge resistance to proposals of that nature. And quite frankly, I don't think that they're necessary. The ways in which we ought to be looking to reduce this council's budget, I think there are twofold, well threefold, but I think one of them's already accepted, and that is trying to access external funding, and there's a list of ways in which we can perhaps access external funding in order to reduce the running costs. But the two other issues that we still haven't exhausted. First of all, we've got the role of town and parish councils, where a previous resolution of the executive did ask that we discuss this issue with those town and parish councils. That hasn't been done. And then the second thing, and again, the previous resolution of the executive covered this, but it was to look at the operational management in order to see whether we could actually cut the overheads and make the leisure services more sustainable and less costly by looking at those issues. And that was prompted by the analysis of the costs of each individual centre, which, when we looked at those costs and we added them up, they came nowhere near the funding that was put into the Leisure Trust. So, question mark, why are those overall costs so much more than the totality of the individual centre running costs? And the answer that came back was, well, it's overheads. So, Chairman, I think we ought to push forward on that, and my first suggestion is that we call for a comprehensive report to the next meeting, which is on the 1st of August, on the implications of bringing the leisure services in-house, and that we have as full an appreciation as we can of how that would work, what it would entail, and how much it would potentially save. And secondly, Chairman, I do think we need to thoroughly explore the role, the contribution that town and parish councils can make to continuing to provide these facilities. And if we do that, it may be that we can sustain the centres, and that we have a sustainable way of ensuring that they continue into the future. In the meantime, we need to be getting on with that investment that we've already agreed in dealing with the outstanding essential maintenance, and where we can the investment in energy saving. And to which, Chairman, I said I've got a question. Early today, you and I were asked about having an urgent item at this evening's meeting.
Yes.
And
can I just say, if it's anything specific, because that's going to be dealt with right at the end of the
okay.
With the public and media.
Yes. Okay.
As long as it isn't.
Right, Chairman, but you've not announced whether you've got an urgent item well, I think there are actually two urgent items. So we need to be clear that there are two urgent items, one of which relates to the essential works involving one of the leisure centres and the contract procedure arrangements for that. So, Chairman, having asked that question, I would move that, first of all, we note the position, the investment that we're putting in. We thank Adam for the report. We note the outcome of the survey, fact-finding survey, and that we ask for a report to the next meeting about potential in-housing of the leisure services, and secondly that the discussions with town and parish councils be held without further delay.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just on the town and parish councils, whilst I appreciate the suggestion, and we're obviously limited to the options, and hence why town and parish councils automatically come into the question. With all due respect, Councillor Whip, I don't know how much money you think town and parish councils have, but it's nowhere near, going to be significant enough to be able to subsidise or pay a subsidy towards leisure services. Whilst leisure services are, of course, essential services for the borough, how much are we going to ask town and parish councils to take on? There's a side point here. I'm sure Councillor Whip is aware of the arising issue over at AB Parish Council with regards to parks maintenance, for example. If we start putting stuff like this onto town and parish councils, we're going to be right up it if one of them pulls out from a subsidy package. So whilst it can be investigated, I just think we need to be probably a little bit more sensible in terms of the pressures that town and parish councils are already feeling with some of the transfer of services that have gone over to the likes of St Nelson and of course Corn as well, with the ones with the larger budgets when it comes to, say, the parks maintenance and of course other services that they've taken on. Throw in leisure services. I just think that we're going to be starting to see not undue but pressure that's simply not going to be maintainable, and I don't think it's financially viable, but we'll investigate the options. Just thought I'd put my points out there, Chairman.
Yeah, Chairman, I appreciate what Zafar is saying, and I agree with him. However, it's an option that we resolved as a council to carry through, and we haven't done it.
Fine.
And we need to. I mean, one of the things that I've been pushing for is whether town and parish councils can pick up some of the costs in terms of leisure activity, but outdoor leisure rather than indoor leisure. And despite pushing for that for many months, we've made no progress on that whatsoever. So in terms of the overall budget for Pendle Council, it's saying difference if we get support in one area rather than another. And I accept that it's not easy, but it's something that we'll have to have those discussions on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was one of the resolutions that you touched on. I think it was last year around this time when we actually asked to have this consultation discussion with parish councils and town councils. So I think we just need to move forward with that. Councillor,
it makes me feel a little bit nervous, and I understand what Councillor Whip's saying. It does make me feel nervous being a town councillor, but I do think it is worth investigating. If we don't look into it, we'll never know. So I think we should go ahead with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Arnold?
Thank you, Chair. Just first of all, thank you, Adam, for the presentation. Just a couple of questions from here. As part of the survey, was there any information about the vulnerable people in society in terms of, we talked about the health inequality earlier on, about the diabetes issue, the heart disease, lower life expectancy. But then particular areas which we know of as a council, do we have a breakdown of how many of them people participate in the survey, A, and B, how many of them people actually use the leisure services themselves?
Yeah, so we asked the census question on disability and long-term illness. It was at the same level as the Pendle overall, so we've got good representation there. I'd have to go away and check what the statistics were on the usage, but I would have flagged it if it was statistically significantly different, so I suspect it would be broadly in line with the others, but I can go away and check.
Yeah, thank you. And secondly, just in terms of the information that was provided as part of the survey, was there any information provided to those participating in the survey as to the cost and the burden on the council? So they had an understanding of the financial difficulties this council and Leisure Trust themselves are in. So they could base their decision on that?
So there was an introduction that set the scene broadly that it wasn't sustainable in the model, and they'd been looking at having those reviews and looking at the ideas. Obviously the ideas were set in the broadest terms to get, I would almost describe this as early engagement or pre-consultation. It wasn't consulting on options as such, it was just treating people openly and saying these are some of the things that have been put to us. So I thought, what do you think? They were given that context, but certainly wasn't a consultation in the sense that they're saying, putting numbers on it like that.
Okay, thanks. Just want to come on some of the further points now, if I may, Chair. In terms of the point about the participation and discussions with town and parish councils, I mean that's the decision of the administration for the council, and the people will have to make difficult choices, because if the decision is, which it is of the council, to retain 3 leisure facilities, there is going to be a cost consequence. And what we're not really still addressing, in my view, is the long-term sustainability of the leisure services themselves. Because all we're really doing is we're passing on the burden. Who's going to ultimately, we're still passing on the burden to the public, the taxpayer. That's what we're saying. I know it's early days and we have them discussions, but if we're going back to the town and parishes and saying, well, you're going to foot the bill, I think it'll be interesting to see what Joe Public thinks in terms of their responses when it comes to paying out of their own pocket. In terms of what's been said, like just touching on what Councillor Whip said, that there's going to be a further report. Did I hear correctly? The next executive is on the 1st of August?
Yes. That's correct, yeah.
So is that realistic in terms of having a comprehensive report to the Legion on the 1st of Exec? Is that? That's what I want to bring some. I just want to bring some realism into the discussion, because I think if we're suggesting there's a report, I personally can't see a detailed, comprehensive report looking at the implications of this, that, and the other. What date are we on? 17. It's like 2 weeks. It ain't gonna happen. So I think we're looking more like September, aren't we? At the earliest. I'll leave it at that.
We are second Councillor Whip's recommendation to consult with town and parish councils and also have a detailed report. Whether that's going to be in 2 weeks or I don't know. I'm seeking advice. I don't think that's going to be yours.
Well, the papers have to go out a week before the meeting, so it's not even 2 weeks, is it? It's less than a week.
Good luck.
So we wouldn't be able to produce something that had that level of quality that we would normally want to see in our reports. September does make a lot of sense, because there's a council meeting in September as well, so that you have that logical sequence if a decision then needs to be taken by council the following week. So there's a lot to be said for that.
David.
Chair, over the last few months there's been a number of reports that have come to this meeting that have showed overspends and pressure on the capital programme. And whilst we set the budget back in February, March, and there was some headroom when we looked at the capital financing requirements and the asset base, there is the pressure on the capital programme that has eaten into that headroom. With this leisure review, there's a number of reports, and I remember, coming to the business, that actually identified the costs and the pressing capital programme that is going to be in front of us. Because these are ageing buildings, these are ageing facilities, that even though a couple of million was put into the capital programme to deal with urgent health and safety in the now, in a few years' time, there's going to be pressing capital programme pressure. And the risk and danger that Pendle are in is that actually the ability to borrow will be gone. Because invariably, with the amount of projects and programmes that's being done, there will be pressures coming from other capital projects. And also there'll be pressure on the Pendle Leisure Trust to come to Pendle for more and more funding. So, whilst I would support, and it'll be the permanent Director of Resources that will follow this through, a review of the options of bringing Pendle Leisure Trust back in-house and reviewing the operational overheads. And I think that's good practice with every, owned business or fully funded business, that you would do that type of review. I do think that there's going to be pressing revenue costs as we move forward. So no matter how you cut and slice this, and obviously I'll be moved on to new pastures, the difficult decision still remains. But actually it's going to be unaffordable to maintain the current leisure facilities. And if you actually go out to the public, no one is ever going to say, yeah, I'll volunteer to actually close one. No one wants to lose something. So it all depends on how that survey was framed and what answer you want to get. So I urge you to move forward with caution, and it is a difficult decision. And you can't rely on extra funding, I believe, from the government, because it will take time if they do realise the state of the public sector funding, what they can actually do and what's in their gift. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you. It's before the Councillor Plummer. Would it be possible to also look at, while we look at the house and talking to the town parish council, like an external provider of these kind of services? Is there, are there business models out there that it's possible to look at the same time?
Through yourself, Chair, we can again certainly look at the option. I guess the challenge that we have is that we have three centres currently losing money. It says within the report they're currently operating a deficit, and also with significant capital investment required. So it doesn't make an attractive proposition for an external user. We can certainly investigate, but again, David used the word proceed with caution. I think it will be very, very, very difficult to secure that external operator.
And just to add to what Damon was saying around the revenue position, that the last study that was done found that retrofitting wouldn't save us all the money that we need to save. We'd still have significant operational costs in terms of how those are run, and that's why that report pointed towards a reduction in facilities. So there is that, whatever happens with the capital, whatever happens with retrofitting and alternative energy use, which then helps with our carbon impact, we've still got a money problem day to day running through. And the other thing just to remind members of, one of the early studies that we had, I think it was the Max Associates one, found that we actually had over-provision of leisure facilities per capita here. So I just want to draw members' attention to all of those issues. Of course, these are emotional things. You're asking people, we love going to that leisure centre, what they think. Of course they're going to tell you, we want to keep it and we want to go to the local one. But there are tough choices here, and it's about getting that information. And we can, of course, bring back to September that information around in-house versus Pendle Leisure Trust, and what we can bring to that to give you that picture. But there are no easy answers here.
Thank you. Councillor Plummer.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to second the motion, and I'm just happy to speak in support. I think we do have to be careful with some of the wording we use around this. There's a lot of doublespeak going on. I think when we say the leisure centres are losing money, I think really what we mean is we're subsidising them at a rate which we can't afford, which it means the exact same thing, but I think it does put it into a different perspective. And I mean, Nazim Ahmed, Councillor Nazim Ahmed, you said, you know, do people realise they're paying out of pocket for these things? I think they do. I think people appreciate that swimming pools are subsidised by local government, and I think people are keenly aware of how expensive they are to maintain. But what I think people also understand, and definitely tell us through, such as this survey, is how important they feel they are as a public asset. A lot of people, you know, were stating the concern about what it means for children and, you know, the younger generation not being able to use their local swimming facility to learn, and for their future, and how important that is for people. The overprescribed angle, I appreciate that, we're prescribed per capita, but I think geographically we're not. We are, you know, we're not an urban core area, we're a very rural borough, and I think that's representative, you know, of how we need to provide those services. You know, you can't just have one central one, because people, you know, there's not a central area. You know, we're peripatetic, whatever that word is.
Polycentric.
Polycentric, thank you. So yeah, I think we do just need to be mindful of that. If we go into town councils, I think it needs to be along the lines of help with, not along the lines of help with losing money. It needs to be along the lines of, we want to maintain this level of service that we've got, and indeed improve if we can. Can you help stack up the subsidy to make sure that that can continue to happen? And I think that difference in language, that double speak, is important. So yeah, move to support that.
Councillor Storm?
Thank you, Chair. I've said this before, but it seems to me that the shared administration have made a strategic error. You've like some sort of mad scientist, you've written the conclusion to your experiment before conducting the experiment. You've committed to keeping 3 leisure centres open with no idea how that is remotely affordable. We've sat here tonight and we've heard Rose, Philip and Damon, all of them, pointing out the financial implications of trying to keep 3 leisure centres open. The fact is that PLT itself has very minimal reserves. Pendle Council has low reserves. We have no capacity for capital investment. Councillor Witt talked about investment. There is no investment. We cannot afford the investment that Councillor Witt talks about. In Mr. Spur's paper, it talks about a figure just for maintaining the 3 centres, keeping them open over the next 10 years, I believe, £7.1 million. Where is that coming from? I don't hear any talk from the administration here tonight about how any of this is remotely affordable. All we hear about is we want to keep 3 leisure centres open, but we have no idea how to do it. I welcome the proposal to consider in-housing. I think that's a sensible thing to do. It may yield some savings. And fair enough, talk to town and parish councils. However, that is a drop in the ocean. There's a big strategic decision that needs to be made, that we can't continue to kick the can down the road and obfuscate. And that strategic decision is, how can we keep 3 leisure centres open? How is it remotely affordable without bankrupting the Pendle Borough Council? I appeal to the executive to actually grasp the nettle here and acknowledge that, yes, we'd all like to keep 3 leisure centres open, in an ideal world, but it isn't remotely feasible. And so I appeal to you to actually grasp that nettle, make that realisation, and start considering the hard decisions that need to be made.
And just a final point to the Chair, the external auditors, Grant Thornton, in the latest value for money report the councillors have got access to, key recommendation 1 talks about the urgent need to work on the financial resilience of the council, and in that response they'll be looking to members to make those tough decisions to ensure it is a sustainable, financial, resilient, medium-term financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I always feel quite terrible coming after Martin because he's such an eloquent speaker. I'm a little bit more rough than he is. But thank you for your report. Adam, was it? Could you just go back a couple of slides to the one where the residents chose the options, as in there's one that, I'll keep going, I'll tell you one, sorry.
I know which one you mean.
It's the one where the two, yeah, that one, thank you. Thinking about doorstep talks with the residents, there's a large proportion of society that will just say, I think one of the phrases that you kind was not on my doorstep, or I don't like change. So within the survey, 8 out of 10 people will probably say, don't change, I like it as it is. And I might be wrong there, even if you said half of those were true. You could probably add, on the top column there, 45% that were in favour. If you remove half of the ones that were against, those are the negative Nellies that just say, I don't want anything to change. And all of a sudden, you've got a lot of people in favour of what should be the most viable option, as we discussed at all review and scrutiny, and as a lot of the reports point to, a two-centre model. So, whilst I agree with Councillor David there, that I can't remember the wording they used, some sort of fury and uproar from society, of course they would be, because the unpalatable option may be to remove one of the facilities. I think what in fact the residents are saying is, dare I say, if half of those are just the ones that don't want any change at all because that's the status quo, a large percentage of the users being furnished with some basic knowledge that Adam said the survey provided are actually open to a serious review of whether we need 3 facilities. I think the one key essential out of the two facility model with the West Craven is obviously the one to keep open because it's geographically much farther away from the other two, and it's high usage there, and that council would welcome the volume of residents that responded to the survey. But again, it's difficult to follow up from Martin. I just think we need to get a real grasp here of reality. It's very fanciful to think that we can keep 3 centres open when we clearly can't. Where's £700,000 a year going to come from? I was at a meeting with Colwyn Town Council last evening talking about the Gala, and they're in shock and over a 10 grand expense for some mats for the Gala next year. Where's it going to come from? So to ask the Town Council at Colwyn, which is probably the most, how much cash they've got in the bank, probably more than any of the others. I don't know. Oh, okay. But they're not going to put a dent in 700 grand a year for the next 10 years. It's all fanciful going and asking them. I think you really need to get a grip of reality here, guys, and support the officers' comments, support the 3 black and white reports that all say you're in cooking land. It ain't going to happen. And I support the comments that Zach made as well. He painted pictures of reality from his experience with the council that he operates in. It's just not viable. All review and scrutiny looked at it. We had the presentations, the passive house report, and model 50 million. As Councillor Whip said, we ain't getting that. 30 million to put a basic one in, we ain't getting that. So what can we do? You've been in charge for 15 months now and you're still requesting more reports. And you tried throwing us under the bus 15 months ago. You're not blaming the Tories anymore. What's happened in 15 months? Reports after reports after reports. Kids not going to ride in on a white stallion anytime soon with a big bag for your swimming pools. It's not. I promise you, it's not.
Move progress, Chairman.
So, you need to get an absolute grasp of reality. I welcome any report that may show that the town councils and parishes will dump 700 grand a year into the council coffers, but it isn't going to happen.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, no, I'm finished. I've finished.
Move for progress, Chairman.
I think in relation to the town council and parish councils, I think down the road, Rosendale, they very successfully worked a programme. I believe it's working. So one of the motions from this executive was to go and consult with town parish councils, and that's what we're trying to carry out.
I think it wants to be honest.
Council Kieran, Roger saying so. No.
Oh, heck. What is that? There's 3 groups of people here representing each town that has a pool, Barnoldswick, Colne and Nelson, and we're all going to fight tooth and nail to save our swimming pools. Now, I take Kieran's points, some of them, not all of them, but we have to look at everything that we possibly can and not leave a stone unturned until we do come to the point where we can do no more. You know, we're not going to leave, we're not going to let our pools, our leisure services in each town, we're not going to let them go just like that. We're going to ask everybody, town and parish councils, and do what we can for the sake of the residents. You know, I'm looking at maybe 4 generations of families that have gone to the leisure centre in Colne. I'm that old, I can do that. And in my ward, for instance, I represent one of the underprivileged, I don't think that's the word, but wards in the borough. A lot of families are literally on the breadline, you know, so the last thing they want is some super pool in the middle of nowhere that they can't access, you know, where I know from, you know, anywhere in Colne, wherever they live, they can walk there, so that pool is important to us, as is Barnoldswick and as is Nelson, and, you know, as councillors, we'll fight as hard as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Kieran.
Thank you, Chairman. I was intending summing up, if there aren't any other speakers.
I think Councillor Armour, last speaker, and before Dave comes in, I'm going to wrap this up.
Yeah. Just want to say, by all means, I think if there are discussions to be had with town and parish councils, that's the decision of the executive, have them discussions. Having said that, also the decision of the council is, so the administration is to retain all 3. Again, no issue with that. But if that's your decision, you need to come up with the answers in terms of how it's going to be funded, not just now, but long term. So we await the answers.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'll respond to that first. There was the answer in the budget that we set in February, where we are providing best part of £800,000 for the essential work that needs to be carried out. That is being funded from reserves. That work is underway already. And I would point out that the issue that we're talking about the waiving contract procedures is in respect of the Pendle Leisure Centre roof. Now, back when the Conservatives were in control of this council, had a majority on this council, the repairs to the Leisure Centre roof were estimated at some £100,000, round figures. The equivalent budget doubled between the time when the Conservatives cancelled it, and I think memory tells me it was in 2018, but it might have been 2019. So the cost has doubled, and that work needs to be done and is going to be carried out. There's a contractor waiting in the wings. So when you say, well, you know, you had 15 months, what have you been doing? Well, we've actually been putting funding in place to get a grip on these problems and actually address the issues that the Conservatives either swept under the carpet or very deliberately decided not to fund that essential work because they had the intention of closing these centres down. Now, whenever we say, well, they want to close centres down, they say, oh, no, we don't. But we've heard again and again and again tonight that they do. That Councillor McGladrey says they're not viable. We said at the overview and scrutiny that we needed to close one. Councillor Stone sings the same song. He says there's no capacity for this. There's minimal reserves. Pendle Council hasn't got any money. And we made a strategic error in committing to keep 3 centres open. Well, yes, we have decided that we want to keep 3 centres open. Yes, we have put funding in place. In total, £2 million of funding is being invested in that work in order to keep those centres going. Now, it's as plain as the Pikestaff that, you know, we've set a stall out, we know what we want to do, exactly how we're going to get to where we want to be, we don't know, and I agree with that. But in terms of, Councillor Olmer says, well, there's cost consequences. Well, I would just point out that the cost of actually operating the centres has gone down, and for instance, the contract for the energy costs is significantly less than it was at the peak expenditure. And I'm not quite sure what they're trying to mutter away there, Chairman. But sorry, I'll give way, Chairman. Somebody wants to come in, I'll give way.
Continue, please. No, Councillor, come on. Councillor Whip, you stop speaking there. Finish.
Thank you, Chairman. The fact is that we can make savings. One of the issues that came out in the survey was that users and residents thought that we could provide better services, leisure services, that we could advertise better, or the Leisure Trust could advertise better. What have I seen in the past 6 to 9 months but a much better focused advertising campaign to get people through the door, paying their entrance fees and using these facilities. Now, I hope that that advertising campaign is being successful and that they're actually getting much better footfall, a much better income, and that as a consequence, the gap between what it costs and the income coming in will be shrinking. So all this work is being done, but all we hear from the Conservatives, Councillor McGladrey says, negative Nellies. He brands residents of Pendle as being negative Nellies. Is Councillor Lord a negative Nelly for sticking up to keep Con swimming pool open? I thought Councillor McGarry was a Con councillor, but apparently, you know, he doesn't care about that. Now, if, and I accept that we're not going to get this report, which I have been calling for some time, to the 1st of August meeting, and I concede that it's going to be September when we have it. But if we have the September round of meetings, the executive and the council meeting, well, I look forward to exactly what the Conservatives will put forward at that full council meeting, because they're full of talking about, we need to close the centre, but they never say which centre it is.
Never said it.
Yeah, who said that?
Well, Councillor Ahmed says we've never said that. Well, Councillor Stone and Councillor McGonigal have both said that tonight, and they've said it repeatedly in the past few months. And then they have the goal to come here and saying, well, you know, you need to close the centre, you need to close the centre. Right, if you don't think we can run 3 centres, you come forward with a proposal as to what you're going to do. Because, like I said earlier on, how do you eat an elephant in little bits? And this is a big problem. It's not a difficult decision, it's a difficult problem. And I think we ought to be determined to work through the problem and solve it little by little and get to a solution that is palatable to everybody in Pendle. And Mr. Chairman, just urge members of the executive to support the resolution that we put
Yeah, so
forward.
we have a motion on the table, so all those in favour?
I was going to say something, if that's all right.
I was summing up, Doc.
Summing up top, yeah.
I was summing up, Doc.
No, I would like to comment on these 3 councillors here who have sat giggling like 3 schoolgirls, grinning.
No, we haven't.
Oh,
Let's move on to the next item on the
terrible,
agenda
terrible.
is Hampshire Industrial Estate Extension.
There you go. There you go.
Councillors, 15.
Thank you,
Hampshire
Chair.
Industrial Estate Extension.
The report sets out an additional commitment of £140,000 for the completion of the work on the scheme for the Phase 1 Lombardshire Industrial Extension. Now, to give it a bit of background, that there was a number of funding streams that came over about in 2019 to help develop that site to enable 2 plots to be developed. As the work was continuing, we put in an access road, and we also had to deal with some of the ground conditions on that road as well. Then we were hit by an issue of COVID, and then the whole programme was delayed somewhat. At the moment, there's some finishing work to be done on that site, and to enable the site to be used for sort of manufacturing and storage and warehousing services on that particular 2 developments. Now, originally, the electricity supply that was required on that site was 2.5 kVA, which came from about 2 kilometres away, and so infrastructure work had to be done. To support and expedite this process, the appointment of actors was undertaken and the waiving of the standing orders. And the reason for the standing orders that were actually waived was set out in section 10. There was time pressures on that scheme to enable a potential tenant to come onto that unit 1. There was also time limits in respect of Electricity North West point of connection, so they had a certain window of opportunity to enable that to happen. And also, at the time, there was actually lack of valid tenders in respect of the provision of services. However, having said that, there was also a contribution of £306,000 from Pearl towards the infrastructure work, as well as the cost for Aptus to actually do the work of about £1,050,000. As the work started, there were some variations on that original scheme, but increasing it by about another £272,000, bringing the contract value about £1,017,000. However, as the scheme was actually progressed, the original tenants that was going to go onto the site, they withdrew, which meant that we had already committed to having an extra capacity on that site of 2,500 kVA, and we were committed to enable that to be delivered. So as the new tenants were identified and they came onto the phase 1, which meant that they only needed 500 kVA in the scheme, we'd actually oversubscribed or overspecified on the scheme at 2,500 kVA. And part of that was that to enable the phase 2 scheme to come along, which originally wanted 500 kVA onto the scheme. Now they wanted to upgrade up to 1000 kVA. Luckily for us, that we had capacity in the system because we'd actually upgraded the system in terms of the original quotes, and that allows for that extra energy to come into the system, but there's a contribution factor from phase 2 to enable that extra capacity to be put in. Now, having looked at that, and questions have been asked whether there's a contribution from one of the tenants on that side to help with the infrastructure work. Having looked through the legal contracts which we have with the phase 2, there isn't one. We're only providing energy to the edge of site. Any additional capacity that they are paying for in terms of £20,000 contribution. There are a number of extra costs that are coming in at this moment in time. So because of the varying nature of the scheme, I've set out in Appendix 1 in terms of the extra costs that we're likely to incur, which are roadworks still to be completed, remediation works, some extra design costs for point of connections, which are requested by Aptus. Again, a connection to the phase 2 substation, and some extra land acquisition costs, which total about 345,000. So from the original total funding of 4.6 million, we've incurred an expenditure of 4.4 million, which means there's another 345,000 coming in, which means that the council has to contribute another £106,000 to the scheme, plus the previous costs that were put together for looking at the viability of the phase 2 scheme, which has now actually been incurred abortive cost of 34,000, which brings up the total cost of about £140,287 required from the capital budget to enable this scheme to complete. So that means the phase 1 is complete, and the phase 2, which is going to be complete in December this year.
Thank you. That's a very detailed report there, Councillor David.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, a bit of a tale of woe in that we haven't come out on a even Stevens with this, and that we are going to have to contribute further funding in order to make it all stack up. But there is no other option in terms of dealing with this. We've incurred the costs, or we need to incur the costs, and we have to find the funding to do so. I'm grateful for Damon with his persistence in rootling through or getting people to root through all of this in the last few months so we can get to an even keel. It's just unfortunate that we're not as buoyant as what we hoped we might have been. But I think there is a learning point in this, Chairman. That's a significant increase in costs, which was agreed by the council several years ago, was the utility supply, the electric supply, which was done through a third-party provider. And I think the learning point is that although they superficially might appear to be the cheapest way of doing it, when you get to the end of the job, as we now have, it turns out that they extract extra funding from you which you didn't anticipate in the first place. So we might have been better going with North West Electricity, to do the job direct. It might have been slightly less expensive, but nevertheless it was a very big element of cost. So I move that we accept the report, Chairman. We've got to balance the books.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm happy to second the report. It's a quick question that I asked at the Pearl Board meeting, but is this something that the Pearl Board can look at or pick up the the costs or contribute towards these costs?
The Pearl Board, we've asked them to contribute the £28,000 for the delays in taking up the point of connections originally, which the Pearl Board have actually agreed to do that, on the caveat that we try with Aptus and Electricity Northwest to see if because we put a lot more upgrading of the infrastructure and whether we can claw that back. So we're in the process of actually asking those questions. The interim result that we've got back is no, because we don't have a contractual obligation with the utility providers or anybody else who then is going to adopt it to give us that money back. So I've already raised that with Pearl to sort of say that this is unlikely for it to come back. So they are now having to commit the £28,000 in terms of contribution to that extra cost.
Thank you. Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. So before the executive make their decision, if I could, through you, Chair, ask Damien. So it is an additional drawdown on capital spend. What is our remaining headroom on capital spend?
So that exercise, through your chair, is being undertaken by Kerr and Spencer as we speak. Over the last few weeks we've been discussing, I suppose, you know, it's all about focus. Of the statements of accounts production was by the end of June, then July, August, it's about then really looking at the first wave, the first quarter's monitoring for revenue and for capital. So that, she's on leave this week and next week, but that's the first priority when she's on return. Looking at that capital financing. Back in January, we commissioned Link to do a balance sheet review that reviewed the capital financing requirements and the headroom, and that exercise will be repeated. So I would imagine, I foresee that in August, and at the appropriate executive meeting, there'll be a report coming back, along with the medium-term financial plan first cut, because it's important that Cabinet and members understand actually a revisit of the assumptions for 25, 26, 26, 27 needs to happen. So that's work's going to be undertaken, and probably during August, ready for you to look at that in September as you start to really look at the budgets and make informed decisions moving forward.
Okay. All those in favour? Okay. Next item is safeguarding update.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the safeguarding update is usually annual, so this was actually provided sort of 2 years previously. It is provided for information. It gives updates on our policies and training in regards to safeguarding for staff, elected members, and including frontline staff. There's a note regarding our designated safeguarding leads and deputy leads and specific training that takes place for taxi drivers, as well as our link to Lancashire Children's Safeguarding Assurance Partnership and the Lancashire Safeguarding Adults Board Section 11 and Care Act compliance update. So I suppose everyone's got the information here, and it is for information, so I would ask if there's any questions that I can obviously answer those if there's any in relation to the report. Thank you.
Any questions for members?
Can I move that we note the report, and thanks Sarah very much.
Yeah, I'll second it. Yeah, thank you. So that goes up to Mr. Cloud, 24-25.
I can take a chair. So a number of months ago, when the settlement came out, probably about February, March, there was a release of further funding by the government. I think it was 600 million nationally, and there was a caveat, and that was that there was a request that we produced a productivity plan. Those productivity plans need to be with government on the 19th, i.e. this Friday. They needed to have gone through members, have got members' endorsement. They are going to be reviewed by a panel in August and help inform setting the budget and the departmental expenditure limits, hopefully for local government. Not quite sure how that's going to happen. When asked civil servants of what the process is, they weren't sure as well. Now, obviously a change of government is taking place, so we're working on the basis that these productivity plans are going to be of value, and that we will meet the statutory deadline of this Friday, and it'll be submitted. The 4 key questions are in this report, and you'll see an appendix from at the time the Department for Levelling Up of Housing and Communities Secretary of State, and it really, well, the Minister was all about understanding what you've been doing to combat waste, what have you been doing to improve productivity, how have you been really embracing the digital transformation agenda, and I suppose the most important, what we believe as officers, is what barriers there has been to actually implementation, productivity, efficiency and effectiveness. We're limited to 4 pages. It's not like the old comprehensive performance assessment, the old CPA days, where the more that you sent in, the more you felt that you added value. This was limited to 4 pages, and it is what it is. We've tried to describe the journey, outline what the issues are, and also talk about the journey that Pendle's been on. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, move the report, Councillor David.
Well, Chairman, I'll second it, but with an amendment, which I'll go into in a moment. But, Chairman, and forgive me, but I forgot to put my reading glasses in my bag tonight. So, Damon only got this onto 4 pages by making the font size incredibly small. So I'm actually struggling to read it afresh. And the copy that I marked up is back at home. So, Chairman, in the introduction, I did ask that we detail the reduction in the estate. So we've gone down from quite a considerable number of administrative buildings down to penny numbers now. And I did ask that that was detailed, and I'm not quite sure whether that's been done.
It actually states, if I may, through you, that we've also reduced the number of customer access buildings formerly referred to as council shops from 7 to 2. So it's the 3rd paragraph, the final sentence.
Yeah, I don't think formerly referred to as council shops is accurate, because we're talking about, you know, we used to have offices in Pendle Rise, for goodness sake. You know, we used to have people in what is now the Pendle Business Centre. We used to have Elliot House, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's a small adjustment there, because it's administrative buildings.
I'm sure we can rephrase that.
We can rephrase that through Sarah. I'm reliant on you to finesse that wording. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, but I've got a beamy bonnet about that one, because, you know, I look at what's been done during, you know, the decade that this council's budget has reduced by 50%, and all the efficiency measures that have been put in place in order to achieve those budget reductions, and for, you know, the then government to say, oh, well, give us a productivity plan. Well, hang on, we've been doing it, you know, for the last decade and a bit, and you know, you can see that in hard numbers, such as the reduction in administrative buildings, such as the reduction in the number of employees, and so on and so on and so forth. But where I think we need to make an amendment, Chairman, is right at the bottom of page 4, and there's a section about the barriers that the government put in our way, and then it talks about other barriers include, and the first bullet point there is political and stakeholder pressures, political considerations, competing interests among stakeholders, and public scrutiny can influence decision making. Well, goodness, oh, fancy that. Public scrutiny can affect decision making. Well, hurrah for that. That's a positive. That's productivity, is that? That's not a disincentive. Can influence decision making and resource allocation, potentially diverting attention away from productivity improvement initiatives, such as, and I quote, removing discretionary services. Well, Chairman, we are not going to include that in a productivity plan. As councillors, we are all about providing services, and it is not productive to remove services because people will be paying the same and getting less, and that is the direct opposite of productivity improvements. It's I can't think of the word, but it's the direct opposite. So, Chairman, I think we need to remove that example, and I think the whole of that bullet point should be removed. And we can replace it with a bullet point that talks about the two-tier nature of our area and the cost shunting that the county council is placing upon places like Pendle, with the example of the waste transfer arrangements. And so, just to refresh people's memories, the county council is doing away with the contract that they have for Suez to transport our waste. As a consequence, Pendle Council's having to spend millions of pounds in creating a new waste transfer station and then forking out £500,000 a year to operate it. Now, how is that productive? I do not know, but in terms of achieving productivity, I think it's a good example of where in a two-tier area that one authority is cost shunting onto another and achieving nothing like productivity. So what I would propose is that we substitute that first bullet point with a bullet point about two-tier areas, cost shunting, and give the example of the waste transfer arrangements, which quite frankly are going to have a lot more impact on our viability in future than the issue of the leisure centres. So I'm in seconding, I move that as a...
Yeah, accept that. I think that can be done, yeah.
Yeah. That's fine, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. The next item is items referred from area committees and village hall. We have a bid from Iron Parish Council.
Chairman, on this one, I'm very sympathetic for Higham getting £10,000 towards the work that's needed to be done there. I asked if officers could look at what external funding there might be available to Higham and indeed other village hall committees in order to do work like this, knowing that a community group in Van Olswyk got £31,000 of funding towards putting a new roof on their building from the Lancashire Environment Fund, and that other organisations have got £10,000 from, I don't know whether it's called Awards for All now, it might be called the Community Fund, but you know, there are grants that can be accessed. So could I just ask for a start if the village hall people have been contacted about this and what advice they've been given?
Sorry, Chair, it's not in my area. I can't comment on that, unfortunately. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll second that, but that's something that we can pick up anyway.
Okay.
We'll contact we'll feedback in, to the show and the Highland Parish Council and
Yeah, so could I suggest
so
that
garden.
we do point them in that direction?
Yeah, that's right.
Chairman, do we have any capacity? I know Jill Dixon used to look at grant funding opportunities. When Audrey was here, Audrey was doing that job, but that's a little while ago now. So, do we have the ability for just giving people a bit of a brief about what funding there is available? I'm probably looking at Sarah.
Yeah, certainly we can certainly look into that and see if there's any options. Jill certainly did that for the leisure review process, so we can have a look and see what's out there.
That's fine. So we'll note this and
advise them to approach. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to support what Councillor Whip has proposed. I was originally going to speak on behalf of my colleague from the Area Committee, Councillor Brian Newman. I know Brian's been wanting to see some action on this building. It is in a dire state and the roof does need replacing fairly urgently. Unfortunately, it did come to our Area Committee and because our budget was only 18,000 in the whole, more than 50%, unfortunately we couldn't support it. So unanimously the Area Committee did say, look, we'll call the exec and try and get this funding because the village hall is really well used and Brian's been pushing it for a while. So yeah, happy to support it. Please could I just make one request? Hopefully we'll get that external funding. If we don't, could we just please request that the executive have another look at it if the answer is no?
Chairman, if it comes back, it comes back, doesn't it?
Can we come back, yeah. All those in favour of that? Thank you. Okay, so we've got the executive work programme.
Chairman, Hodge House, there's supposed to be an agreement for Bradley Big Local. What's happened there? It's not come. It's supposed to come today. I'm just wondering if there's been an update. Oh, has it? That's fine. Here it is.
Okay, so we've got 2 emergency items and these are for exclusion of the public and press. And excluding the public and press from the meeting in the next foreign item business in the sense of the power contained in section 100.
Chairman, are you able to outline the nature of the business and the reason why it needs to be urgent, considered urgent?
Ask my
well, we will be asking the councillors here to consider excluding the press and public for reasons that financial business affairs of this authority and others are going to be discussed. The added complication is that these are, as Councillor has just said, and as the Chairman has just said, these are urgent items. It might be better if I defer to my colleagues as to the reasons for the urgency of the items without giving specifics.
Okay, yeah, through yourself, Chair, as the Monitoring Officer has outlined 2 separate reports here. The urgency of decisions this evening are effectively a press need to get on 2 elements of work that need to progress in very, very short order, hence they couldn't wait for the next meeting, unfortunately.
That's fair. I think there's some urgent works like but we need decisions on that can't wait to do, there's even further delay. So
the item commercially sensitive, that it needs to be, that we need to exclude the public and press. So just going back to the urgent nature, am allowed to ask why is it urgent, or will that open the can of worms?
Chairman, I think it's the timeliness. In both cases, it's urgent that the respective work is got on with as soon as.
And I believe that's at the discretion of the leader, which is a view has already been taken. So that's not up for discussion really.
But can I ask, if it's urgent, when did that information come to light to make it urgent, like it has to be discussed tonight?
Towards today. Towards it's today.
Yeah, the briefing, I only had a briefing on one item, which was the Pendle Leisure Centre. The other one I've not had any briefing of the papers so far at this stage, but that's for discussion. But I think was it Monday or Friday? I can't remember.
So through yourself, Chair, the first I became aware of these two items was Monday of this week.
So Monday. I was asked if this can be considered because of the nature of the non-commercial sensitivity and everything, so I'm happy to support exclusion of the public interest.
I can.
So, no, yeah,
I'm happy to second you that, and I'll just make some comments on that. Of course, I have been briefed on the second item, and hence why I would urge colleagues to support the resolution to exclude press and public due to the nature of some of the matters that will be discussed in that particular item.
Just before we go to the vote on that, you're saying one of the two, but we can take them individually.
I was going to
exclude separately.
Yeah.
That aside, so this is a tendering process. If there's no opportunity for further companies to bid past this point, I don't believe that would prejudice the tendering process, and I don't think in that case it would be commercially sensitive at this point.
I think through yourself, Chair, the only thing I can do is reiterate the previous advice that there may be further commercial opportunities that this information could potentially provide an advantage to a commercial company. I can say no more than that.
That's right, no, so we have a motion to exclude the public and press. All those in favour? All those against? Okay, that's carried.